Hi, I'm Susan Keefe from Rhubarb Cod, and today I'm overthinking spaghetti and meatballs. In North America, spaghetti and meatballs is the quintessential pasta dish. Seriously, it's right up there with mac and cheese. But while spaghetti and meatballs grace the menus of Italian restaurants across Canada and the US, it's actually American in origin. Between 1880 and 1920, over 4 million Italians immigrated to the United States, and of that number, roughly 85% of them came from southern Italy. The region was experiencing widespread economic hardship at the time, so citizens of Sicily, Calabria, Campania, and Abruzzi made the voyage in search of better opportunities. Many of them settled in New York, which is thought to be the birthplace of spaghetti and meatballs. New York was a meat processing hub at the time. The aptly named Meatpacking District was known for its wall-to-wall meat processing plants and slaughterhouses. In the US, and particularly in New York City, meat was far more plentiful and cheaper than it had been in southern Italy. So the traditional breadcrumb-heavy marble-sized meatballs called polpette gave way to the large orbs of marinara-coated meat that we know today. In fact, you'll find most iconic American Italian dishes are far more meat-centric than their Italian counterparts. The first written mention of a dish featuring spaghetti and meatballs was published in 1888 in New York by a Juliet Corson. A number of similar recipes were subsequently published in the years that followed, but none of them were referred to as spaghetti and meatballs. The first time the dish was referred to as spaghetti and meatballs was in 1938 when it appeared on a list of canned products produced by the Ettore Boiardi, eventually renamed to Chef Boyardee. But enough about where it came from, let's make it. We're going to start by chopping 1 yellow onion. Just give it a quick dice, nothing fancy. Next, we're going to mince the garlic, 4 cloves worth. I'm going to split it in half because half of it is destined for the meatballs and the other half will go in the sauce. And finally, we're going to chiffonade some basil. I'm going to do a fair amount and again, split it in 2. And that's all the chopping. Really, that's it. It's a pretty light lift. Next, sorry. Sounds like I was faking. Next, we're going to take things briefly to the stove. We're going to take a large, deep skillet and add 2 teaspoons of whole fennel seeds. Place the skillet over medium heat and toast the fennel seeds until fragrant, shaking the pan frequently. Transfer the fennel seeds to a bowl and set them aside. Now, let's get the meatballs underway. Start by placing a pound of ground beef in a medium-sized bowl. This is lean ground beef, but feel free to get inventive. You could go with a combination of pork and beef, or lamb and beef, or go all in with chicken. It's totally up to you. To the beef, add half of the garlic, the fennel seeds you toasted earlier, 1 teaspoon of dried oregano, half of the basil, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes. Use half of the crushed red pepper flakes if you're sensitive to heat. Next, add 1/3 cup of breadcrumbs, the zest of half an orange, 1 large egg, and fresh ground pepper. Mix everything together with your immaculately clean hands, or you can use a spoon if the thought of touching raw meat wigs you out. Next, remember that you were supposed to add half a cup of shredded grana padano, and add it now. Mix it again, and then you're done, I promise. Take out a small baking sheet and place it next to the bowl. Using a tablespoon as a guide, form the meat mixture into a series of meatballs. You can, of course, make your meatballs a lot larger than this. I've been served plates of spaghetti and meatballs with meatballs the size of my fist. But I actually prefer more of a 2-bite meatball. They're easier to break up with your fork, and they cook through evenly in the sauce in no time flat. But again, you do you. Make the meatballs you want to see in the world. Once the meatballs are formed, pour 2 tablespoons of olive oil in the skillet you used to toast the fennel seeds. Once the oil is shimmering, add the meatballs to the skillet and brown them on all sides. When adding meatballs to a hot skillet, make sure you brown them sufficiently before attempting to flip them. The meatballs will let you know when they're done by releasing themselves from the pan. If you get impatient and attempt to churn them prematurely, you could rip them. And the thought of an imperfect meatball upsets me more than it probably should. Just give the pan a shake every so often and see which meatballs are released. Those are the ones that are ready to be flipped. Once the meatballs are browned, transfer them to a plate and set them aside. Don't worry about cooking the meatballs all the way through. We're going to simmer them in the sauce at the end, and that should finish them off. And speaking of sauce, let's get it started. I made the meatballs first so we could sear them and then build the sauce in the same pan. Those caramelized bits give an otherwise very simple marinara sauce a good dose of umami right off the bat. Add the onion we diced earlier to the skillet along with a generous pinch of salt. Once the onions are translucent, add the remaining garlic, 1 teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes, and a heaping tablespoon of tomato paste. Give everything a quick stir and let cook for a minute or so. Deglaze the pan with 1/3 cup of white wine. You can use red wine if you prefer. Sherry and dry vermouth would also play very nicely. Add 1 can of whole plum tomatoes to the skillet and break them up with the back of your spoon. Bring the mixture up to a boil and reduce to a simmer. Add a tablespoon of demerara sugar, a parm rind, and 2 bay leaves. Let the sauce simmer for 15 minutes. If you don't have a parm rind, you can of course omit it, but I like to keep them on hand for adding a little extra umami to broths and sauces. Just keep them in a freezer bag so they're always at the ready. While the sauce is simmering, place a large pot of water over high heat and bring it to a boil. Liberally salt the water and add 500 grams of dried spaghetti. Cook the pasta until al dente. Be sure to use a larger pot than you think you need. A lot of space will help keep the pasta from sticking together, and make sure you give it a toss every now and then while it's cooking. Once the sauce is done simmering, take it off of the heat and fish out the parm rind and the bay leaves. Transfer the sauce to a blender and blitz until smooth. Pour the sauce back into the skillet and return it to the heat. Bring it back up to a simmer and add the meatballs. Simmer the meatballs in the sauce for 10 minutes. Your pasta should be done by now. Drain and rinse your pasta if you wish. Now there are many slightly aggressive opinions on whether or not you should rinse your pasta. The common school of thought is that you should rinse the starchy film off of your pasta if it doesn't serve the dish. If you're serving the pasta cold in a salad, it makes sense to rinse it so it doesn't stick together. But it's believed if you're serving the pasta hot with a hot sauce, the starch actually encourages the sauce to cling to the noodle. But in the end, what you do with your pasta is between you and your pasta. Once the meatballs are done simmering, stir in the remaining basil and take the sauce off of the heat. Pile the pasta into bowls and spoon the sauce and meatballs over top. I generally like to include 3 to 4 meatballs per serving. Finish the pasta with a sprinkling of shredded grana padano or parmigiano reggiano and a few fresh basil leaves. Serve immediately. And that's all I could think to overthink about spaghetti and meatballs. I hope you give this one a go, and if you do give it a try, let me know how it went in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to this channel. I post a new recipe every week and a ton of goodies along the way. Thank you for cooking with me. I'll see you all next time.